we have two gentlemen who've been at the forefront of driving the changes, the big changes to the international tax policy landscape. Mr. Bob Stack from the US Treasury, Deputy Assistant Secretary at the US Treasury, and he's played quite a big role in BEPS, and we are going to hear from him on the EU Apple ruling. Mr. Akhilesh Ranjan, who's been the face of Indian international tax for the last few years, and who Mr. Pascal Amant just mentioned here at the IFA Congress at this panel, who's played a key role in the BEPS project. That's great to hear. Flying the India flag high, and of course with me, Mukesh Bhutani, permanent scientific member of the IFA, who'll be asking some tough questions to both of them. I'll start with you, Mr. Stack.
Yes.
The key takeaways of the panel before we come to the Apple ruling is: one, the inclusive framework will now going forward play a bigger role in international tax policy. Probably you were not so sold. Number two, the role of G20 in tax policy is here to stay, as per your words. And number three, the importance of minimum standard.
Sure. Well, first, number one, we are very supportive of the inclusive framework because we understood early on, and in fact it was partly my work with India that helped teach me that you need to be talking about these issues with everyone at the table. And so I think the inclusive framework was inevitable, but I think it's going to be a good thing for tax policy. Number two, I think the role of G20 in tax is going to be here to stay because it brings, again, everyone in the G20 around the table. And then three, the minimum standards in BEPS were important, and I think all countries are going to move to implement them, and that's a sign of the consensus and the unity that we had in the BEPS project.
Mm-hmm. Especially on the inclusive framework, sir.
No, I think
the expanding role.
Well, yes, I think it is becoming more than what I had envisaged earlier. But yes, right now, with so many countries joining in, the mandate that it has, I think its role is going to keep increasing in importance. So I see many things.
Including non-BEPS.
I see it moving on beyond BEPS at some stage, not right now, but maybe at some stage where the countries who are there together in this framework may at some stage want to go into issues that are important but are not yet covered by BEPS.
And the role of G20, the proactive role?
That, of course, I think the G20 is the major forum, the main forum, I think the only forum that is leading the tax initiative everywhere. It has rightfully taken a lead. It has the major economies as members. I think it's the right forum which has a balance of different types of economies, which can really think of what is required in tax policy, what sort of initiatives are required, and then find the ways and means of accomplishing those objectives. So I think the relevance of G20 is increasing again day by day. I think this is the most important organization.
Mr. Stack, coming to the hottest issue around and which almost threatens to derail the BEPS project in the US's own words. Yesterday at the Bloomberg panel, you called the EU ruling on Apple a colossal blunder, an extraordinary rejection of the arm's length standard. And you went on to say it would have been cowardice if you hadn't shown up and asked tough questions. And further, you also went on to say you have to apply the same rules to those we may vilify and those whom we do not.
Thank
Please
you.
go.
So look, I think that first of all, one of the things I've learned this week is that the uncertainty created by the Commission's role in Apple is now upsetting EU professionals and EU companies because they're understanding that the rules are very unclear, even for your normal companies operating across border. That's number one. Number two, the main objections that we had to the Apple case expressed in our white paper were it looked to us like a brand new rule being applied retroactively. And number two, it departed from all this work we do in building an international consensus. Now, an Indian audience can identify with the fact that the world complains about retroactive tax rules.
We've borne the brunt of it.
And your government has actually done things to cut back the amount of laws that will be applied retroactively because you have felt what it feels like to have the world upset about retroactive tax changes. Now the Europeans are doing the same and perhaps worse given the size of the judgment, and they should be held to the same standard that India has been held to.
Mukesh, you talked about looming tax wars, on the EU Apple thing in an article. You want to ask Mr. Stack something about that?
Well, I think clearly the US reaction is evident. My larger question, Bob, for you was that, minus even the Apple case, there were areas of stress between the US and the G20 on BEPS. Do you see BEPS, and I think it will be a bit of an overreaction to say that it's going to derail a lot of BEPS related debate that US has been having. But what do you see as the immediate consequences of the Apple ruling and some of the issues that lingered on even as a part of the G20 negotiations?
So I think, for example, and I've already mentioned this to Martin Kreinbaum, who's the new chair of the CFA, that if the United States is going to come and deal with over 20 European countries at the OECD, we need to have some kind of mutual agreement that our work at the OECD is meaningful. And a new arm's length standard in Europe or new public country-by-country rules that are not what we agreed is going to make future consensus building very difficult. Another party should not just walk away from consensus. So I think we're going to be in for a tricky period as we move forward.
But you're not going to pull out of the BEPS project, right?
No, we will not.
What's the future of the BEPS project, Mr. Stack? I mean, here we are. Last year I asked you to crystal ball gaze on the BEPS project. There's been tremendous progress since that, and I'll put the same to Mr. Ranjan as well. But where does the US stand on BEPS? You have concerns on CBC. The US congressional leadership has taken a tough stance on some of the BEPS action plans, especially country-by-country reporting. Where exactly does America stand on BEPS?
So there are 4 minimum standards, and we meet them all as of today, including country-by-country reporting, which we were able to do by regulations, number one. Number two, it's important to stay in the BEPS process because I do think that this is where we're going to try to get some consensus around rules so everybody's not doing something different. And number three, we're at a very important stage. We're at implementation, refining different agreements, and so I think it's been in overarching a good process with a lot of good deliverables. And yes, there have been tensions, but that is to be expected, I think, in any type of a multilateral discussion.
Arun, shifting gears a little bit, because we have two gentlemen from US and India, let me ask a very pertinent question for US businesses in India. It'll be useful to get Mr. Ranjan's comments and Bob's comments on what's the status on the resolution of MAP. We saw a period of stress that we went through. How is it doing? Have you been able to meet the target? Because the ball really is in the court of competent authorities of both the countries. And more importantly, how do you gentlemen see the bilateral APA process between United States and India working? Because both of these are very, very important for US businesses in India, and it's equally important for our country, which stands out for attracting the maximum investment from the United States.
You want to go so first?
Well, I think we made some tremendous progress in MAP. You're aware of that. We have, I think, resolved already more than 110 or 20 cases. More are in the pipeline. We have also started talking about other types of cases, not just mere transfer pricing, but treaty issues as well. And the most important, of course, as you just mentioned, the bilateral APA having opened up. Now, that is a big challenge for both countries. For us, the challenge is to put in more resources, to have more manpower out there, devote more time to that aspect, and try and work out solutions that we can move faster on that bilateral process. And for the US, it was also a challenge to refine and to refine the views and come to some sort of a understanding on basic principles with India, so that the APA program as a whole can move faster and not get stuck on case-wise approach in APA.
Yeah, I agree that we've made a lot of progress in the APA competent authorities. There's a lot of knowledge on both sides of the teams that are working together, and I think there's been a lot of success. As we move through the cases, there are some harder cases out there that are not within the framework that the teams need to move on. You know, I view the bilateral APA program as a kind of almost a good faith consummation of this, because the proof will really be up to the companies whether or not they see that the two governments can come to agreement in particular cases. And that will be huge, but it is challenging in part because of the divergent views that the countries may have in terms of, let's say, the value to be attributed to, let's say, activities that are being undertaken in India. But it's in everybody's interest to find the compromise, because it'll be great for India and great for US business if we can have that added certainty of this program. So we're going to stay at it. I know India's going to stay at it, and I'm optimistic we'll get to a good place.
You should be happy that India has signed over 100 unilateral APAs in a record time.
Yes, no, I mean it's really a terrific sign. I know, coming a student of India, I know how much India is trying to focus on creating an environment to support investment, and I think they're working very hard at it and making great strides, and I can see that from the United States, and it's very much appreciated.
Mukesh, anything on CBC you want to ask? Mr.
Yeah,
Ranjan? There was a lot of discussion on CBC. Today.
Excellent panel. I think the discussions were extremely non-partisan, with everybody expressing their view. So you made a reference on the country-by-country reporting minimum standards for India making an exception, and you carved out an exception, and I know marketing intangibles is a big debate in our country. Is it a policy stance that the Indian government has taken? What did you actually have in your mind when you made that comment? I'm mindful when I ask this question and hope it's not a tough question. I don't want to be persona non grata in Ministry of Finance.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So I think if I'm reproducing his comments correctly or attributing it correctly, he said that there would be some changes in the local file and Indian government might want to see more information with regard to some items like marketing intangibles.
The reason I asked this question is because this debate has reached at the highest level in the federal court now.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to note that from a tax policy standpoint, what is it that India really has in their mind on the exception?
No, I didn't mean to be alarmist at all. I hope I haven't conveyed that impression. But the fact is, you are aware of that importance that we lay on marketing intangibles. We feel that it is a very relevant factor whenever we are pricing any transaction having to do something with India. So information certainly is required by us on arrangements which can indicate the creation of marketing intangibles in India. That's one part of it. I was responding there to how we can expand, how we will approach the local filing documentation requirements. So those requirements would include things which can indicate the creation and development of marketing intangibles. Now, how they're going to do it, this is not again the Government of India's view, this is my personal view. As an administrator of transfer pricing, I think this is what we would recommend to the government, that we would like to have more information on this. On the use of profit split, I had mentioned it there. I think yes, that's something we might have to do, but again within the framework. I'm not saying anything outside of, let's say, the OECD.
I think you refer to some particular situations.
Yes, so it's only when there is interlacing of intangibles, you find intangibles everywhere all over the place, which is affecting that transaction, and then the logical method then would be a profit split, and then we would need to look at that more carefully.
I think, Mr. Ranjan, it was very clear that we are going to stick to the arm's length standard, and no one is envisaging a situation where we move to formulary apportionment. Last two questions for both of you, and I'm going to ask you to wear the Nostradamus hat soon. But first, you had Brexit. You have a situation in several countries, in Europe, possibly US, a large section of population which believes, being not isolationist, but more putting the country first, probably putting the country's interest first. And there has been a backlash in the last few months, which Brexit clearly showed, against globalization. So on the one hand, you have a backlash against globalization, and isn't it a bit ironic that at the same time you're having a coordinated global tax policy effort led by the G20? Can these two coexist? If this backlash develops, and you had some alarmist headlines from Washington Post and New York Times post the Brexit vote on how the middle class, how the working class feels left out. So, tax policy, you also mentioned that the G20 wants sustained growth. That's what the leaders are looking at. But can these two coexist? A globalized tax policy and an isolationist approach to trade?
So look, the key is for all of us policymakers and even political leaders to stress to the world that managing globalization well is a win for everybody. It's not just a win for India having more U.S. business in India, it's a win for the United States to have more business it can do with India. And I think that's the challenge, is not to get lost in kind of over-politicized rhetoric, but to just keep at the day-to-day work of making things better for investment and growth around the world. And that's the right side of that issue.
My last question to you. If there is a change in administration, be it a Clinton administration or a Trump administration, will the fundamental approach of US to international tax policy or project like BEPS remain the same?
I don't know because I can't speak for those administrations because they're not in yet. My guess would be, there's the hat I have to wear. Look, my guess would be that most of the work we're doing here is very mainstream, trying to bring together and coordinate tax policy, and it shouldn't fundamentally be that controversial. The alternative is to stay home and close your eyes and hope that the world just either goes away or